A study by Bernard Down, by C.V. Angels. Chapter 3. So the thing is, Bernard is so sure Superboy has a crush on his boyfriend. Sure, he was mostly just teasing Tim the day they all met, but the more time he spends hanging out with Con and Cassie and Bart, the more he clocks how Con's eyes linger in a way the others just don't, how he's brighter around Tim, and how he's just shy of totally and completely awkward around Bernard. For a guy with a semi-secret identity, who clearly has to do some amount of lying for his whole shtick, he just can't come up with a good excuse for why he gets vaguely flustered and immediately leaves anytime he and Bernard are alone together. Usually, Bernard would write this off. So one of Tim's friends doesn't like him. Big deal. Except there's a strong possibility that Tim also has a crush on Con, with the way they're always vaguely touching and finishing each other's thoughts. Have seen fit to make a move in the years they've known each other. But then there's this other part that was always kind of rooting for Robin and Superboy, and it feels a little unfair to be the person standing between that. And well, he doesn't think he'd mind all that much if Tim wanted to date both of them. He's got another PowerPoint all ready to go, titled Polyamory. Thoughts? As a placeholder he hasn't managed to fix yet. He's working on it. The only snag is that he's not about to share a boyfriend with a guy who can't stand him. Operation Befriend Superboy so he can date Bernard's boyfriend is a go. That name is a work in progress too. Sue him. He's still trying to think of a good excuse when he finds himself waiting in line at a bank in Metropolis. He's in the city on a trip with Gotham U, but his debit card declined. And trying to call a bank in Gotham for help in another city is impossible. He'd been on hold for 20 minutes. And then they just hung up on him and wouldn't answer when he called back, and so now he's waiting to get cash out of a shiny, clean Metropolis branch, pondering how to approach Con. It's not like his top choice is to text a literal superhero to go grab coffee and scare him off completely by sending the wrong vibes, but he's not really sure how else to hang out with the guy one-on-one. Bernard is so focused on mentally drafting a text as he inches forward in the line that he almost doesn't notice when a guy with guns enters. Almost. He is from Gotham, after all. He probably should have known better than to set foot in a bank. He literally groans aloud as the alarms start blaring, as he settles himself off to the side like a good hostage and starts playing Tetris on his phone. "Hey," a gruff voice startles him from his game. Bernard's fingers pause on the screen as he looks up to see one of the masked thugs in front of him. "Give me your money," the thug says. Bernard can't help it. He laughs. "Dude, for real?" Bernard suddenly finds himself staring down the barrel of a gun. He should probably be more frightened, shaking like the woman beside him, silently handing over crumpled bills. But he's been in his fair share of holdups, and this guy looks like he's never shot anyone in his life. They haven't even gassed anyone yet. So Bernard pulls out his wallet and opens it a little more flippantly than he probably should. "Let's see," he muses aloud. "I've got a driver's license, a library card, my shitty useless debit card that I can't get any money out of, which is why I'm, at the bank. Oh, I've got a punch card to Batburger. It's like 2 punches away from being full. You want that?" From what little of his face Bernard can see, the thug looks simultaneously bemused and pissed. "Okay then, give me your watch. And your phone." "You're robbing a bank," Bernard says. "For cash, and you want me to give you stuff you'll have to pawn off? You don't seem great at this, so let me save you the trouble and just say no, because if you try to sell my shit, it'll definitely get traced back to you. This is like Grand Larceny 101. The thug mutters something that sounds a lot like fucking Gothamites, and his finger tightens on the trigger, and, maybe this guy has shot people before. Bernard is just coming to terms with the fact that he might have miscalculated when the door crashes in, and the shouting starts, and the next thing he knows, he's getting swept out of the bank faster than he can blink. Faster than he can register the familiar leather jacket and furrowed brow. He winds up in a herd of other civilians as he gives a statement to the police, watching as Superman delivers the last of the thieves into the back of a police wagon. By the time he's finally allowed to walk away, it's late afternoon, and he definitely needs to start finding his way back to the hotel. He starts to pull up navigation on his phone as he turns a corner and walks straight into a brick wall. A brick wall that catches him as he stumbles backwards, grip warm and firm on his arms as he's steadied. "You're a moron," Khan says to him. Bernard thinks it's the first thing Khan has said directly to him since they met, and he sounds angry, which certainly beats uncomfortable or awkward or overcompensating. Bernard grins. "Could have been worse," he says with a shrug. "That guy almost shot you." "Nah, he was bluffing." "Maybe, hopefully." Gon stares at Bernard for a long moment before finally releasing him. "You and him both, man," he mutters with a small smile. "You stress me out." Gon steps back, running a hand through his curls as he takes a deep breath. Bernard noticed he's changed out of his hero getup and is instead in a flannel and jeans. He'd gone home and changed and then come back, specifically to intercept Bernard. Bernard can work with this. "Listen, I'm sorry for freaking you out. Want to go grab a coffee or something?" "Sure," Khan says, throwing his hands up a little helplessly. "Why not?" Khan begins leading him towards a cafe he knows, back past the bank where Bernard can still make out a flash of blue and red lights and a string of yellow tape. His steps slow as he stares at the scene, with a sinking realization. "Ah, fuck," he says. "I still don't have any money." Khan laughs, slinging an arm over Bernard's shoulders and tugging him along. "I'll trade you coffee for that Batburger punch card." "Deal." Bernard agrees with a grin. Yeah, he can work with this. After that, he starts seeing more and more of Khan. The other boys stop shying away from him in group settings, and they have standing hangouts every other Thursday, when Tim has his long board meetings with the West Coast offices. "I'm so glad he stopped being weird," Tim remarks. "I thought I was gonna have to kick his ass." "I'm a little offended, actually," Bernard teases. "I feel like I'm not Gotham enough if the good old Kansas boy isn't weird about me. I need to become more off-putting." "I've desensitized him," Tim says with a bright laugh. And, yeah, Bernard knows. Tim is beautiful and sophisticated, and Robin is hot and unsettling, and the combination really is the best Gotham has to offer. Operation Quasi-Throuple is going great. Bernard thinks that name is less fun, but at least it's shorter. "I can't believe they resurrected Laurel just to kill her off again," Khan complains as they exit the theater. Wendy the Werewolf Stalker, for Shadow of the Moon, is playing on a limited run, while Tim is on an actual business trip to Tokyo. So Bernard offered to see it with Khan, despite not having seen a single episode of the Wendy show. "Seems like a waste," Bernard agrees cheerily, just to watch Khan launch into a long-winded explanation of the villain's role in the show, and how he would have changed the script to better suit her power set. Bernard's mesmerized as he watches him, a small grin curling across his face. Khan's passionate, cheeks flushed as he gestures broadly with his hands, hair unkempt from the number of times he's buried his face in his hands during the film. In the dim light of the dingy theater, he's real in a way that Bernard's not sure he's ever seen him. They step out into the cool night air, brisk for Gotham in early September. It's a rare night, the sky miraculously clear of clouds and smog to show the stars glittering brightly overhead. There's even less light pollution than usual, Two-Face having knocked out the power to a third of the city last night that still hasn't been restored. It'll be back up tomorrow, but for now, Bernard can see actual constellations. He misses Tim, because Tim would have been able to tell him about the science of each star. He glances at his watch. 10 a.m. in Tokyo. Tim's already at work. "What's up?" Khan asks, noticing Bernard's shift. "Oh, it's nothing," Bernard says, slipping his eyes back to the sky. "Tim and I sometimes go up in the old Gotham bell tower at nights like these, is all." Khan nudges him. "Want to go?" "I don't actually own a grappling hook," Bernard says. "There will be other nights." "Dude," Khan says slowly, waiting until Bernard looks at him. "I can fly, remember?" Which is how they find themselves high above the streets of old Gotham, sitting on the roof of the bell tower, with the streets sprawled out below them. Bernard's breathless. He's never flown before, and it's different from grappling. All weightlessness and freedom and trust. Khan settles beside him, tracing out the constellations he knows, and Bernard weighs in with Greek myths he remembers. "There's something up with Oron," Bernard says at one point, gesturing up at the shape in the sky. "Like, that one star is not just a star." We should have called Tim, Con says, pulling out his phone. He would know. He's in a meeting. He works too much, Con says, and, well, Bernard doesn't exactly disagree. Is someone dying? Tim asks, hurried and staticky over the speaker. We had a space question, Con says, and Bernard can't help the laugh that escapes him. Turn on your video. Connor, I'm busy. Connor, he's busy! Bernard echoes with a pout. He doesn't have time to tell us about the weird star. Tim sighs loudly, obnoxiously, so Bernard knows he's not really mad. It's daylight in Japan, sun streaming in through the window on Tim's left and casting his features in gold. His face is stern as he looks at them, but he's fighting a smile at the corner of his mouth. I have time for exactly one urgent space question, he says. Con switches the camera outward and points. Bernard says that star's got secrets. It's not a star, it's a nebula. Tim corrects automatically. Con, I'm pretty sure that's tube knowledge. Guess I forgot, Con says, with an easy shrug and a wink. Bernard has to bite his lip to keep the grin from slitting his face. Hey, is that where we played intergalactic baseball? Intergalactic what? Bernard asks with glee. You have to tell me about this. And they do. Tim and Con talk over and interrupt each other to tell him about various space adventures they went on as teenagers. A part of Bernard thinks he should feel left out, but he doesn't. Sitting beside Con in Gotham and watching Tim's animated explanation from thousands of miles away, he just feels warm and included and in love. Eventually, Tim comes out of the meeting room to drag Tim back in. They've been on the phone for over 20 minutes. Duty calls, he says apologetically. Thanks for calling, though. Really. I can't believe you don't want to hang out with us, Bernard teases, laughing when Con bats his eyelashes. You're two of my favorite people. I always want to hang out with you, Tim says, and it's so earnest that Bernard aches. Bernard is shivering by the time Con flies him home. Night has well and truly fallen, and the usual trapped heat is dissipated by the clear skies. Con notices, because of course he does, and he slings his jacket over Bernard's shoulders, refusing to take it back when they finally reach Bernard's door. I'll get it next week, Con says, like it's that easy. And then he's off in the night, and Bernard is sitting outside his apartment, rubbing the sleeves of the jacket between his fingers, and he realizes that maybe Operation Quasi-Throuple went a little sideways. God damn it, Bernard's going to have to update the PowerPoint. Chapter 4. Hey, I'm home. Tim calls out as he shuts the door of his apartment behind him. He tosses his keys into the dish beside the door, and takes a moment to nudge Bernard's shoes into line with the shoe rack before making his way into the living room. Bernard is tucked into the corner of his sofa, wearing one of Tim's oversized sweaters, and tapping away on the keyboard of his laptop. He looks up with a small smile when he sees Tim, craning up to kiss him hello as Tim continues through the apartment to drop his work bag off in his office. Hey! Bernard calls, as Tim detours once more to hang his coat in the hall closet. Can I talk to you about something? You already discovered I'm impulse, babe. What else is there? Tim jokes with a fond eye roll. It's meant to diffuse whatever tension is brewing in the air. The tension that's been brewing for 2 weeks. But when Tim finally stops to really look at Bernard, he realizes he miscalculated. Bernard is, if anything, more tense, shoulders high as he worries his lip between his teeth, and refuses to meet Tim's eye. Anxiety curls in Tim's chest as he hurries over to sit beside his boyfriend, the man he loves, who is currently sending extremely concerning signals that are sending Tim's heart rate into overdrive. Of course we can talk, Tim says, aiming for reassuring and missing it by a mile. Okay, cool, Bernard says, and then Tim watches him take 3 deep breaths to gather himself. It's doing nothing for Tim's health. He finally meets Tim's gaze. First, I want to preface this by saying I love you very much, and nothing has to change, and if you want, I will never bring it up again. Tim thinks this makes him feel worse, actually. He starts to think back to every interaction he's had with Bernard in the last month, cataloging his behavior, building a case in his mind. Before Tim can commit to spiraling, Bernard carefully sets his laptop on the coffee table so Tim can see it. It takes a moment, or 4, for him to register what it says. and then several more to comprehend anything. The categorical benefits of polyamory in our relationship. It says, in an unassuming black font against a plain white background. A study by Bernard DOWD. Tim has prepared for a lot of things in his life. He has contingencies for everything. Fake uncles, and new identities, and plans for any number of world-ending events. He was not prepared for this. "You want us to date other people?" he says weakly. "No," Bernard says immediately, which helps, but then follows with, "Well, kind of yes, but also no." "Why?" Bernard's hand finds his, squeezing it once, and Tim kind of hates how grounding it is. "Please just let me get through this. I promise there's a point. A good one. Trust me." Timothy Drake Wayne, Robin, is not a man who trusts easily. He lies as easily as he breathes, and has a million exit strategies for bad situations. He's constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop in every single one of his relationships. Tim steadies himself, and nods at Bernard, waving for him to continue. He regrets it almost immediately. "You, Tim Drake, are in love with Connor Kent." The glaring title is followed by a neatly bulleted list of evidence, ranging from things Tim has said, to stories he's told, to his physical reactions around Con. Tim would be impressed by the detective work if he didn't want to sink into the couch forever. It's not like Tim didn't know. Sure, he hadn't come to terms with his bisexuality until semi-recently, but looking back on his time with Young Justice, it becomes so obvious that his feelings for Con were far from strictly platonic. He probably should have realized that around the second or third cloning attempt. But hey, hindsight is 20/20. But by the time Tim was firmly comfortable in his sexuality, he was dating Bernard, and so deliriously happy that it shouldn't have mattered. He wouldn't jeopardize what he has for whatever tangled feelings he still carries for Con. And besides, it's not like Connor Kent is also in love with you, Tim Drake. The listed evidence on this slide is equally damning, if circumstantial. Tim thinks he might throw up. Con moves to continue his presentation, but Tim pushes the computer out of his reach. He needs a minute. Or a few days. A year, maybe, to come to terms with this. Beside him, Bernard tugs a loose string on his cuff. "Please," Tim croaks. "Enough with the PowerPoint. I just thought it might be easier if I laid it all out." Bernard says quietly. "Like a case report. It is easier. It's also much, much worse. There's still room for doubt. There's always room for doubt. But not enough. Not as much as Tim has purposely maintained in the past. He can't look at Bernard right now, even though he knows Bernard is looking at him. He feels too exposed, too raw. "Why did you show me this?" Tim asks, and he hates how unsteady he is. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees Bernard reach to comfort him before letting his hand drop. "Tell me right now that you wouldn't want to date Con, and I'll drop it." "I'm not breaking up with you to go chasing after Con, Bernard. I chose you. I'll keep choosing you." Bernard sighs. "I'm trying to tell you that you don't have to choose. It's like the whole point." Tim thinks he's losing his mind. Probably, but there's a spark in his chest now. Something that feels suspiciously like hope. It's a door unlocking for the first time in years. One he's jammed shut and never allowed himself to really analyze. There's something else about that he can't quite reach through the mess of emotions. Why Bernard would bring it up when what they have is so good. And why he would bring it up now. So he does what he knows. Gathers intel. "So, what then? Con and I date. And then you and I also date." "Sure," Bernard says after a beat. "I would be fine with that," he continues. But he sounds just a touch off, hesitant. Tim focuses on Bernard, on where he's still tugging gently on his sleeve. He meets Tim's eyes with an encouraging smile, but the edges are false. Tim knows him too well to be fooled, but he doesn't know why Bernard would bring this up if he'd be unhappy with it. "Talk to me," Tim prods, nudging Bernard a bit. "What do you want?" "I just want you to be happy," Bernard says with a laugh, and Tim hates it. "Bernard." Tim cuts him off, and Bernard wilts under his stare. It's not like a bat stare, and it's not a boardroom stare, but it leaves no room for argument. No room to hide. It only takes a second or two before Bernard buries his face in his hands. "I don't know how this happened," he whined. "I was just trying to be his friend because everything was so awkward, and I didn't think it would be fun for you to date both of us if we couldn't even be in a room together. But then he was just so nice and charming, and I was like, stop, Bernard, you're reading into things. And I love you, Tim. Of course I love you so much. But then he smiles at me, or takes me flying, and he keeps lending me his jacket, and I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean." There's a warm feeling building in Tim's chest, and he lets it surface. A soft smile splitting his face. He catches Bernard's frantically waving hand, successfully stopping the tirade in its tracks. Bernard just stares at him, red in the face, chest heaving. Maybe Tim is allowed to have this. Maybe he's allowed to be selfish, just this once. Maybe it isn't selfish at all. "Bernard, babe," Tim says, lacing their fingers together. "What do you want?" Bernard lets his eyes rove over Tim's face for a moment, before he answers. "Ideally," he says slowly, carefully, "ideally we would all just date each other." Tim grins. He doesn't think he's ever been more in love. "Okay, so what's the plan?" Bernard's answering smile is radiant. He reaches over Tim, leaning into his space to get to the computer, and clicks through a number of slides before he reaches the last one. Solution: ask Khan on a date. "That's not a plan, that's a statement," Tim says, arching an eyebrow, as Bernard sticks his tongue out at him. They were very close now, Bernard fully in Tim's space, face just inches away. His eyes glitter playfully, and Tim is so glad they've both lost the nervous edge from before. "I got us this far," Bernard says, breath ghosting on Tim's cheek. "Your turn." And well, Tim's always been the plan guy. "Deal," he says, before pulling Bernard into a searing kiss. Tim's not sure he's ever made a plan this important before. Well, okay, that's extremely far from true, in the grand scheme of his vigilante career, and the lives he's saved, and the threats he's extinguished. He's never made a plan this important to his and Khan's relationship, a plan that has so much potential for self-inflicted emotional devastation. Tim is up for 2 days straight, thinking through contingencies and exit paths, and ways to fake his death and flee the country. There's a case board and string. He calls Bernard, who comes over and encourages him for an additional day. He calls Bart, who laughs at him and then in turn calls Cassie, who tells him and Bernard they're morons. And it's 3 a.m, and if they don't woman up and just ask Khan like normal people, she'll tie them all together with her lasso, for an undetermined amount of time. They find themselves at a small bistro near Bernard's apartment, just after the end of the lunch rush. It's a cute place, quiet, with enough outdoor seating for them to be tucked away by themselves. If Khan feels like he needs to leave, all he has to do is walk away. The only witness is the waiter who Tim had asked to leave them be for at least 15 minutes. The other patrons are all inside, far away from any potential fallout. Based on the evidence Tim and Bernard have collected, and the annoyed tirade from Cassie, the potential for everything to go horribly, disastrously wrong is only about 3%. But that's 3% too much for Tim's liking. Tim takes a few deliberate breaths as he and Bernard wait for Khan to arrive. His poker face is impeccable. His heart rate, as even as he can get it. If he can lie to Batman, he can play this cool. Bernard, at his side, is steadily tearing his napkin to shreds. Tim reaches over and laces their fingers together, receiving a tight-lipped smile in response. "I don't think I've ever seen you this worked up," Tim teases gently. "Not even during the whole cult fiasco." "I knew you were coming for me then," Bernard says like it's obvious. "Lot of faith to have in me." "Please," Bernard scoffs. But there's no heat, his smile softening. "You weren't gonna let me die. You're way too into me, for one." "Keen observation skills, as always," Tim says wryly. "Haven't failed me yet," Bernard grins. He takes a breath, shoulders loosening as he looks to where Khan has just turned a corner, waving at them both. "Haven't failed me yet," he repeats, softer, fonder. Khan slides into the chair across from them, tucking his sunglasses up onto his curls. He beams at them, and Tim is 15 years old again, and harboring a feeling it would take him years to name. Con's so beautiful, it almost hurts to look directly at him. The sun in person form. Hey Con, we really appreciate you joining us today. Tim starts, perfectly cordial. Con blinks at him, bemused, before leaning towards Bernard. Why do I feel like I've been called to the principal's office? He asks in a stage whisper. Bernard snorts. I don't know, man. Have you been bad? He responds with a wicked grin. Nice to see he's not nervous anymore. Tim kicks him under the table. We just wanted to talk to you for a minute. Tim soldiers on, doing his best to ignore Bernard's curse as he rubs his chin, and the way the tips of Bernard's ears have gone pink. Sure, Con says slowly, looking back and forth between them. Is everything okay? Hopefully. Tim assures, doing his best to tramp down on the nerves bubbling in his chest. He just has to get the words out, like he rehearsed. He's Robin, goddammit. He can do this. We just wanted to see if you might be amenable to the possibility of pursuing a relationship. It's non-traditional, we know, but we've talked about it a lot, and we think we'd work well together. If you're interested, of course. Time seems to stand still as Con looks at Tim. He opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again, and all he manages is a strangled, "What?" We're trying to date you, Con, Bernard says plainly. Because we like you. So much. Con stares at Bernard for just long enough that Tim's starting to feel like this is the worst idea on the planet. When he finally goes to speak, Tim braces for the worst. Yeah? Con breathes. Yeah, okay. He telegraphs his next move, reaching to cup Bernard's face in his hand. I'm so down, he reiterates, and then he kisses Bernard. Bernard kisses back enthusiastically, grabbing the collar of Con's shirt and hauling him closer. Con goes willingly, leaning half across the table as he attempts to devour Tim's boyfriend. It's the hottest thing Tim has ever seen. He's breathless and giddy, with relief and with want. Bernard breaks the kiss first, coming up for air as he stares at Con in wonder. Con looks back, equal parts rapt and smug. Oh, we're keeping you forever, Bernard says, and he sounds absolutely wrecked. There's no getting rid of me now. Con laughs, pulling Bernard into another searing kiss. When they separate, Con turns his smirk on Tim, and Tim thinks he might combust. He circles the table, keeping a hand firmly clasped in Bernard's as he crowds into Tim's space. How about it, Rob? He's close enough that his breath ghosts along Tim's ear. He can see every single one of his freckles. Are you amenable to that? Tim gives him a sharp grin of his own. I don't know, clone boy. Why don't you show me what you've got? Kissing Con is simultaneously exactly like everything Tim has ever imagined, and nothing like he could ever have dreamed. Con's hand presses into the small of Tim's back, pulling him closer, and Tim winds his arm around Con's neck. He's lost in Con, in the press of his lips and the heat of his body, and the sheer, overwhelming euphoria that this is happening. Tim eventually draws away to catch his breath. His eyes rove over Con's face, memorizing him and this moment. Con's lopsided grin is so achingly soft. His hands move from Tim's waist to brush a lock of his hair back from his forehead, and Tim thinks his heart might beat out of his chest. Con's other hand still has a hold on Bernard, who is sitting with his chin propped up on his free hand, eyes lidded, and smile sultry. Don't mind me, he says when he sees Tim looking. Just enjoying the view. Also, we might have traumatized the waiter. He adds, jerking his head over to where the man is lingering by the door, alternating between staring at their table and the menus in his hand. Tim doesn't even try to stop the laugh that bubbles out of him. He should probably be a little concerned about his public image, but he can't bring himself to care. He drops a few $100s on the table before pulling Bernard to his feet. He presses a kiss to his temple, heart swooping as Bernard giggles and leans into him. They make their way home, him and Bernard and Con, barely managing not to trip over one another for how close they're entangled. This is twice now that Bernard's insane PowerPoints have drastically altered his life for the better. Unbelievable. Epilogue. Tim's first mistake is allowing a meeting to get rescheduled over game night. His second mistake is looking at his phone in the middle of said meeting. They're discussing scheduling, some design reviews that's been pushed off to accommodate new prototyping, and so Tim pulls out his phone to consult his personal calendar in addition to his work one, and is immediately bombarded by messages. He should ignore them. He should, but it's the Bart and Cassie and Con and Bernard group chat, and he would so much rather be with them right now. So, against his better judgment, he swipes open the chat and is met with Cassie swiftly losing her mind. Tim, you need to get your ass over here and control your boyfriends. They're dirty cheaters! The text is followed by an image of a precarious Jenga tower. It's far too unstable to stand. Blocks stacked in ways that should certainly have fallen. Bernard stands on one table, leaning up on his toes to place the next block. Con sits on the floor, one hand blatantly pressed to the surface of the table, as the others fend off interference from Bart. Another image follows almost immediately, from Bart this time. Cassie is mid-table flip, Jenga blocks raining down on Con as he lunges to catch Bernard. The next image, from Con, is a selfie. He and Bernard pout at the camera, lying on the carpet and surrounded by wooden blocks. It's captioned, "Save us, babe. We're being bullied." Tim can feel the smile threatening to split his face. He looks up at Tam, at the group of project managers in the room with him. "That time should work fine if you send me the notice," he confirms, before the speaker can pull up the next slide deck. Tim continues, "Why don't we call it there for the day? We're ahead of schedule and we can pick up next week." He doesn't give anyone a chance to protest, scooping up his bag and his laptop, and departing with a jaunty wave. Someone can yell at him about it tomorrow. He doesn't care. He has better places to be. Notes. I love doing cursory fic research for DC because I never get a straightforward answer. Like, did you know that Metropolis is maybe in Kansas and is also maybe in Delaware, but maybe only across the bay from Gotham, but maybe is several hours plane ride away? I should stop going for any continuity in my fics because DC clearly doesn't care. Thanks for sticking with me, gang. Glad we made it here in the end. If you liked the story, the link to the original fic is in the description below. Make sure to leave the author kudos and comments. If you have any fics you would like me to read, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Intergalactic